In this course, we're primarily concerned with architectural interiors. What we're really talking about when we talk about exterior lights is mimicking the sun and our sky. We can mimic the sky using the Unreal Skylight here, and our sun can be mimicked using a directional light. So just like any 3D tool, we have access to those options. The other thing we need to do is add a background to our exterior. We will show you some techniques for adding in a sky dome essentially that has animated clouds in it. But before we do that, let's go ahead and look at our directional or sunlight. We could just drag the directional light in here in Unreal, but we've already imported one from 3ds Max, and this is our V-Ray sun, which again is essentially a directional light. The sunlight has pretty much all of the same settings that the point and spotlights have, so we're not going to cover those again. Our sunlight is set to stationary. If we want to be able to take advantage of distance field shadows, the higher quality shadowing, we do need to be set to either stationary or movable. They will not work with static lighting. In my fully baked version of the scene, let's take a look at the light source angle. And you're going to find there are two light source angles on a directional light. The difference is the first light source angle, which you'll find under Light in the Details panel, this is for dynamic lights only. It only works with distance field shadows or capsule shadows, and it's for generating the softer shadow effect. So light source angle, obviously, if you increase this, it's basically increasing the size of the sun disk. And the larger the size of the sun disk, the softer the shadows you get. But remember, this is only for dynamic-based lighting. Scrolling down to our light mask settings, you'll find light source angle again. And this is for baked lighting. So if you want to increase the penumbra of your light, the shadows, this is where you'll do it for your baked lighting. So you can increase this to say 10 degrees, and this would create a much softer shadow baked into your light maps. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to the default value of 1. If we scroll down, we'll find a special effect that we can apply to a directional light, and that's light shafts. To use that, you can use two versions. You've got light shaft occlusion or light shaft bloom. I'm going to go with light shaft bloom, and we're not going to really be able to see it right now because everything's so dark, but when we come back to this, we'll just need to tweak this bloom scale and bloom threshold. And of course, under that, we have our distance field shadows. We wanted to enable those. And remember, your distance field shadows, those are going to give you a crisper shadow. Below this, on our light mask settings, we have light source angle. This is going to allow you to tweak the penumbra size. We also want to check use area shadows for stationary lights. Below this, we have Cascade shadow maps. We're not going to be discussing that because these tend to apply more for larger exterior scenes than they do for interior scenes. To get some ambient lighting filtering in through our windows, aside from the direct sunlight, we have a couple of options available to us. We want to basically simulate the blue sky dome around us, and we can use either a skylight to do that, or we could use some fill lights. Of course, that's the most laborious method. But with a skylight, we can simply drop the skylight in here and just tweak some settings and get this done a lot faster. Just bear in mind, this might not be the most physically accurate result. Now, the lighting has two ways of working in the skylight. We can either capture the scene around it, or we can use a cube map, an HDR cube map of our own. By default, it's set to capture the scene. If we scroll down to Skylight, we can hit the recapture button here to go ahead and capture the scene on demand. The other option, of course, is to use our own HDR cube map. Importing an HDR image is just as easy as anything else. We'll go into our HDRI folder here, hit the import button, and grab our HDR map. I've got a 2K image here I'm going to bring in. Then I need to change the drop down so it says specified cube map, and then I can drag and drop that onto the texture swatch. Right away, we can see our scene has become lit up. Our skylight is doing its job. So we can change the angle here very easily. Just use this drag and slide so we can change the direction that the cube map is facing. With intensity, we can control the brightness of the skylight so we can bring it up higher or lower. Now we have distance field ambient occlusion. So distance field ambient occlusion basically uses a bent normal, and it modifies the skylight's diffuse lighting. This only works on DirectX 11, any modern video card. So if you're using old hardware or maybe a mobile device, this is not going to be an option available to you. And another thing to keep in mind, to be able to use distance field ambient occlusion, you have to have shadow casting enabled for the light, which we do. Now the other thing is we need to set the light to movable instead of stationary if we want to use it. Occlusion max distance here will affect basically how far out the ambient occlusion is being rendered. We can also control the contrast of our ambient occlusion and the strength. Finally, with min occlusion, we can ensure that we don't have any areas that are fully black. So we're basically specifying the lower limit of the ambient occlusion darkness. If you find that the ambient occlusion is not very effective on a piece of geometry and you want to increase the quality settings, you can certainly do that. Just right-click on the geometry in question and choose to edit it. Then under LOD0, we want to scroll down and open Build Settings. And then under Build Settings, we see this distance field resolution here. We can increase this value. Obviously, the higher the value, the higher the quality here. But bear in mind that this will have an impact on performance. Here I have a fully baked scene using the skylight and distance field ambient occlusion. I can visualize the effect of the occlusion if I go to Show, Visualize, and then Distance Field Ambient Occlusion. Using this visualization allows us to see just the distance field ambient occlusion contribution of the skylight. Now by adjusting these parameters, we can see the effect without any of the other information such as materials or direct lighting getting in the way. The other option we have is to use fill lights on the outside of the windows. We can basically take a spotlight in Unreal like I have here. Then we're going to set a low intensity. In this case, I'll start with 50 lumens. Set the color to something kind of light blue. And then we'll simply duplicate that light. By duplicating this light across the window like this, we create the effect of an area light. In this case, we've decided to go with fill lights to our scene, but if we had used skylights in our HDR image, there is one other thing you might want to consider, and that is light mask portals. So if you go into the Modes window here, the Modes tab, and type Light Mask Portal, you'll find that here, and we can drag it into the scene. So adding a light mask portal around your windows is going to basically tell the light mask baker where it should focus its efforts, and that will help to improve the quality of the lighting when using a skylight. Be careful, however, not to use them in very large levels. Stick to only interior scenes like this. Don't use them outside. Otherwise, that can really increase your bake times. In this case, we're not going to be needing them. Last of all, we need to add our sky dome to our exterior lighting. And we have a couple of options available to us. Obviously, we could bring a sky dome in from our 3D tool. Unreal has a few options though. First up, if we go under Visual Effects, we can use Atmospheric Fog. If we drop that into our scene, we can see it adds basically atmospheric fog outside of the scene. But it also has a sun disk, and that sun disk can be tied to the actual directional light in the scene. But rather than use that, I'm going to use something called a BP Sky Sphere. So if you do a search for BP Sky, there we go. Inside of your Modes tab here, we'll just drop that into the scene. We get the same basic effect as the atmospheric fog. The BP Sky Sphere, or let's just call it Sky Sphere for now because it's a bit of a mouthful, it allows you to have animated clouds as well as the sun disk. So what we're going to do first of all to get it set up is under the Details panel, under Default, we want to set the Directional Light Actor. So just click on the drop down and we'll pick our V-Ray Sunlight here. And obviously that changes the color of the sky right off the bat to match where the sun is in the sky. Now, one great benefit of adding our sky dome is now we have some color in the background, and this means that our sun's light rays can get some color to generate themselves. So if we pan the camera around here, we can see the effect, and they're obviously way too pronounced. So at this point, we'd want to go into our sunlight, scroll down to our light shafts, and just adjust the scale here, bring it down to something a little more reasonable. Now, after we've got our sunlight attached to the sky sphere, we can start to play with the cloud settings. So for cloud opacity, that's going to tell you how many clouds you want visible in your scene. So let's go ahead and increase that value, and you'll start to see the clouds appear. We can go really, really dense. At the default settings, the cloud speed of 1.0 is a nice subtle effect, but if you want to get an idea of them actually moving, we can pump it way up to 5, kind of exaggerated, but now we can see them moving across really nicely there. Okay, so we still have some things we want to set up, such as reflection and volumetric lighting, but we'll go ahead and fire off a test light map bake to see where we stand. My test bake is completed. I wanted to mention on the build settings for the solver, I used lighting quality medium. You want to avoid using anything higher than that when you're doing test bakes. Normally you would use preview, but I decided to go for a slightly higher resolution version here. We'll talk more about that when we discuss light mask settings. There are some issues, even though this came out pretty good for a test bake. You'll notice on the rug here, we've got some resolution issues. We could probably solve that by increasing the light map resolution on the rug, as well as increasing the solver settings and tweaking the light mask settings themselves. There's also some light leaking. So if we look at the floor here, we've got some obvious light leaking. This could be bleed because actually this floor is not a flat plane. This floor is actually made up of all of the individual planks of the hardwood floor. And as a result, when the light map was generated, it's got a lot of planks on there that are pretty close to each other. And so we're getting some bleed over there that we're going to have to fix. We can see our gray ball and chrome sphere here are doing a great job of telling us very quickly what our scene lighting is like. We obviously have our core shadows, and you can see some resolution issues here. That's probably because of the solver's settings and some other light map settings we'll need to adjust. We can also see the reflection environment. I've gone ahead and added in the ability to get reflections on our materials. Now, if you notice, this reflection is not 100% accurate. We can see the tops of the lamps above here reflected in the environment, and obviously this should not be reflecting at this point. If we look over on this wall here, we can see some obvious light map UV issues here, as well as some darkness at the bottom of this object that shouldn't be there. So I'm guessing in this case, we probably have some bad light map UVs. We're going to have to manually generate them for this object. Another thing is the walls. These walls are basically a solid piece all the way around the scene. We might want to break that up into individual walls. In the viewport, there are a couple of diagnostic modes we can use to look at our lighting without extra information. So for instance, if we go to lit and then change this to detail lighting, we're getting the lighting information without materials, but we're still getting reflections. We can also go into lighting only mode, and this is purely the lighting information. There are no reflections in this mode. Next, we'll take a look at the systems available to us in Unreal Studio for adding high-quality reflections to objects like glasses and mirrors, as well as also impacting the lighting environment. We'll see you there.